Hello, my name is Tracy Blakeney, and I'm here to review the book Holy Listening, The Art of Spiritual Direction by Margaret Guenther. Um, Reverend Dr. Margaret B. Guenther lived to be 87 years old. She died in 2016. So she is a fascinating woman because she did so much as a woman in the Episcopal Church throughout her life. The book Holy Listening begins and ends by speaking of spiritual directors as amateurs. This seems to rely on her humility in what she does and her humility before God. The tone of the book is intelligent, conversational, and even amusing in places. She contends that when people come for spiritual direction, they want of God, though they may not be able to verbalize it. She is actually cagey about defining spiritual direction, possibly because it is difficult to pin down. She differentiates it from psychotherapy because they use the same raw material, but in spiritual direction, we utilize holy listening, and psychotherapists do not. They are not trained for that. She also calls spiritual direction hierarchical because of the covenanted relationship that the seeker and the director share. This book is so unique because it's written by a woman who was married and had raised children. For that reason alone, I think it's a useful book. She uses the metaphor of a traditional woman's life as how she frames spiritual direction. She starts out by saying we must welcome the stranger, and for that we have to keep our house in order, meaning to take care of ourselves. And that can be through physically taking care of ourselves, getting spiritual direction ourselves, going on retreats, and doing other things to keep our channels open. She also promotes art, music, and literature as ways to see God's blessings. And she also believed in the virtue of hard work. Now today, we share virtual spaces with seekers, so the actual physical environment is not as important, but the environment that we create over the web is important. It's still important. And one thing that we can really do is to avoid interruptions. She herself opened her session with silence and ended it with the sign of peace, which is lovely if that is your spiritual way of being. It would not be my way though, but that's okay. Interestingly, she shares some mental tricks on how to not crowd a seeker. For example, she would say 10 Jesus prayers before saying anything after a seeker said something, and 5 before breaking silence, which is kind of amusing to me. She is also careful to not respond with strong emotion because she wishes to model the loving mercy of God, who will forgive anything by maintaining her equanimity. And maybe that is just something that they teach priests. She was an Episcopal priest. She also talks about taking out the garbage, which is another domestic activity. And so she offered to receive the confession of a penitent seeker, and said that she would carry it for them, and their job was to be at peace, and her job was to later carry it to God. I would also differ in this way. I probably would end up having the seeker take out the garbage themselves so that they could feel that sense of accomplishment. Anyway, she talks about the danger of taking on the sins of others by listening with, quote, the mind in the heart. She emphasizes that we must let ourselves be touched by a seeker's burdens before we can actively work to release it to God. For her, taking on the burden is important, as God would have taken on our sins, did take on our sins in her framework. Then we put the seeker at peace. But again, that is her framework. There is a chapter on spiritual directors as teachers as well. She asks all the same questions that we are learning to ask, but she adds this question: where does this person's story fit in our common Christian story? And so that is not a framework that I would share, but I can see how it could be very useful, especially if you have common frames of reference of Bible stories to share. There's lots of stories of troubles and joys in the Bible. And she finished this section by saying, when he allows himself to be known to himself, to another, and to God, the directee will be aware of the web of relationship that connects him to all creation. And I thought that was a very powerful statement, and it would also be a beautiful outcome. Another chapter asks us to consider ourselves midwives of the soul. I think she does this mostly to wake us to the seriousness of our purpose and the vulnerability of the directee. She reminds us that each person is a child of God. And I think that is a useful thing to remember. She likens transition in childbirth, which is the most painful part typically of childbirth, to spiritual desolation. But the midwife knows the directee will come out on the other side, and so she can console. And she can also confront or coach the woman to share what she is thinking and feeling through this period. And at the end of the working through of the problem, the directee and the director can join in the joy of the birth, as she puts it. Later in a section I can particularly relate to, she talks about not everyone being a candidate for spiritual direction. That could be those who are content with their life as it is, going to services and worshiping in community, or those who are outwardly directed, as I was for so long. I had been longing for inner spirituality, but I did not know really where to find it. Now my spirituality is directed inward. But people's lives in the external world change all the time. And while I'm not a unique case, I'm sure that this happens to a lot of people. So the spiritual director must listen to what is being said and also needs to listen to what is not being said and to determine when time is right for certain things. Guenther goes on to name every stage of childbirth and the attendant tasks for the spiritual director. One of the powers of the spiritual director midwife is to be able to sit with intention during the difficult moments. For example, just sit with intention. Also, because she is the observer, the spiritual director can assist with loving, calm presence in solidarity with the patient. I thought that was a very beautiful metaphor. Overall, I love the metaphor of hospitality, pregnancy, and childbirth as an easy mnemonic for how we can best attend our seekers. I will remember this and will likely refer back to this book when I need a reminder of the overall process. I do feel empowered by using a language women have given birth, and they can understand it differently than sources, and we can understand it differently than sources penned by men. At the same time, men may have a hard time understanding this book. The Christian language and practices were distracting for me, so not all of it is usable. If I have a seeker from my faith or similar faith, I imagine there would be greater comfort within our own language. Still, the Bible speaks in stories, and if I know those human problems and joys that are in Bible stories, I can share them as long as I know it won't be something that would put off a seeker that was with me. I also appreciate this book as a window into the life of an amazing woman who led a very spiritual life and brought help and healing to others, because this is not something I have ever heard about before. Thank you.